All right. So, yeah, we've got a very important and a very interesting discussion today. And the discussion is around sourcing methods. And a particular focus within that is around sourcing what is sometimes called innovation. So sourcing innovation, sourcing things and sourcing services that are innovative in themselves. And an extreme is that sometimes it's very difficult to source that because that particular product or service has not yet been invented. And so to describe that becomes quite difficult if you use conventional sourcing techniques. And if you use the techniques that are described and implied in many ways in the regulations, both in the PFMA regulations as well as in the Preferential Procurement Regulations 2017. And so it's not just around the sourcing of innovation, but it's this discussion today. If you're not into innovation, then open your mind in terms of sourcing methods and some of the things that you'll pick up today around sourcing methods. So we are very, very fortunate to have Lwazi, who is a manager at NRF. He's in the supply chain unit at the head office in NRF. And he has a wealth of experience. He's also has an engineering background. Lwazi, is that right?
Correct, yes, Sean, at a master's level, yes.
And what discipline was that?
Okay, so I have a BSc in chemistry, undergraduate, and honors and masters in materials engineering.
Materials, and fascinating. So, and I know that you're studying as well. And
yes, so I'm basically at the moment at the very, very beginning stages of PhD studies and looking into innovation procurement instruments in particular. So I'm just looking at the relationship between innovation and procurement, yes.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So thank you very much, Lwazi, for agreeing to come on. There we are. You got your, lovely to see you there. Good.
Hello, colleagues.
Good. And thank you very much, Lwazi. So you've pulled some stuff together. I was very fortunate to see a presentation of yours a couple of weeks ago, which was very, very interesting and very well put together, and really looking forward to you sharing some of your insights in this very important topic. So I'm going to hand over to you. What I would suggest, Lwazi, if you agree with that, is then let's give you a chance to present and go through. And once you have done the presentation, looks like you've got about 30 slides there. Wow, fantastic. Then we could open it up for discussion. Is that okay?
I'm perfectly fine with that, Sean. Yes.
Otherwise, we might find that you're kind of already discussing, and 5 minutes into your presentation, you never finish the whole thing. So if you're okay with that, let's go with that. So thank you, Lwazi. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sean, and good morning, colleagues. And thank you for this very fascinating opportunity for me to actually present some thoughts around innovation procurement and the related procurement instruments on innovation procurement. And I think, as Sean has alluded, that I'll be placing my focus mainly on the innovation procurement instruments. I know there's a lot of other intersecting or sort of interfacing things such as regulations and all of that. I won't be placing my focus of this presentation on that at this point. Perhaps maybe one day when I get an opportunity, we may talk about the impact of legislation around these instruments. But at the moment, I'll focus more on how these instruments work and their impact and what they've done for other countries that are actually using them. Right. Just as a way of introduction, my name is Lwazi Qangule. I work for the National Research Foundation, As Sean has mentioned, I'm one of the managers in supply chain, and I deal specifically with specifications, policies, and systems at the NRF from an SCM perspective. I'm very passionate about innovation, and this is why I've taken the stance to actually pursue PhD studies in innovation procurement. So I think just to get going, colleagues, I think that I always have a litmus test that I have to determine whether we are still living in Jurassic World. I think as a light note to start off the presentation, I often ask the question whether can you purchase innovation in South Africa, which is something that does not yet exist or something that is universally new. So something completely new in the public sector. Can you actually purchase that thing? And, you know, in more cases than not, you'd find that it's mostly no, because you have to wait for it to be in the market for you to be able to actually purchase it. And the reason for that is because, you know, like Sean mentioned earlier on, that, you know, it's not clearly defined. And without you clearly defining it, it's difficult for the market to actually respond. And, you know, you'll find that there's a very few participants that are actually available to respond to that. And which would lead you to situations where you're using instruments that are frowned upon by National Treasury, for example, and Auditor General, such as deviations, because you'll find there's single sources or sole sources that are that can provide that particular service or product. So then how do you go about doing this if you have an innovation policy as a country and you have innovation targets and you want to grow the innovation space within your country if you can't procure such instruments? And we're just going to look at how we're going to be using such instruments to be able to procure innovation. All right. So I think just to start off, I'd like to turn our focus in the history of the innovation cycle as actually defined by Joseph Schumpeter in the different long wave business cycles when it comes to innovation. And he say at the moment we're sitting with apparently 6 waves. And I think the question that I want us to bring forward is, where does South Africa sit when it comes to those waves? Are we ahead of the curve, or do we often find ourselves behind the curve when it comes to innovation? And I think we need to ask the questions, why is that? Why is it that we are always lagging behind and we're not the guys at the forefront of innovation? And I think part of the answer is that we do not have the necessary or the right or the requisite instruments to actually help us drive innovation in South Africa, especially from a public sector perspective, because the public sector is often thought of as the main pocket or the big purse of the country, because that's where most of the resources are to be able to actually help us break through. And, you know, with innovation comes economic growth, and there's no two ways about it. So it's either you innovate or you stay behind. And at the moment, we as South Africa, we're lagging behind. And I know there's been a lot of talks about the AI and Internet of Things and all of that, but are we paying lip service to all of this, or are we really making steadfast improvements to ensure that we're actually ahead of the curve there? Okay. So just looking at the lay of the land, colleagues. So I think I want to focus our attention on just high level the legislation in terms of whether is there diffusion in our legislation at the moment, starting from the Constitution, the PFMA and the Triple PFA, the Innovation Policy, which is the white paper, and the 10-year plan, and the Procurement Bill. And you find that, in my view, at least from the research that I've done, there's a lot of gaps. These legislations or policies do not speak to each other. You have the Constitution, yes, which is laying the foundation, but then you have the PFMA, which does not speak to the innovation policy or policies. And then those innovation policies recognizes the role of procurement in enhancing and accelerating procurement. Then you have the procurement bill that just came through, and it speaks of innovation, but is it deliberate about innovation? And that's a big question that we have. And just the quick analysis that I've done is that, the innovation policy, for example, mentions procurement 19 times. Is that sufficient? I don't know. But, it's a matter of what is it saying about procurement, and how are we going to go about procuring these instruments. But it's not for that policy to actually define that. But it acknowledges the role of procurement in growing our innovation space. And the practical impact of innovation as well, of procurement on the innovation policy itself. And the PFMA, there's zero mention of innovation. One would say that it was developed without innovation in mind at all. And there's no real impact that it has towards innovation. And then you have the procurement bill. It only mentions innovation twice and tends towards supporting it. But, it doesn't tell you what kind of instruments are available or what instruments can be used to actually promote this innovation in a practical sense. How do you then actually enable and support the innovation? As a policy or as a framework, it should actually give you that kind of guidance, even if it's at a high level, but it's very silent on the available instruments to actually drive innovation. Just to get a sense in terms of what are the instruments available for procurement in South Africa at the moment. And these are the instruments that are available. And you'll notice that I've actually highlighted some of these in red. And Sean mentioned earlier on that some of these are actually incorporated in some of the regulations, like Treasury regulations and the PFMA. They are sort of mentioned and to give some sense of direction. But then there's others, instruments that are available at the moment that, are not necessarily part of any legislative framework, perhaps maybe in some guidelines, but, it does not actually give you that sense of direction. And I think that's where the problem starts, because there's no enumeration of such kind of instruments that are available and how you'd be able to use these instruments. It makes it difficult for us to actually move on to the next level, which is the innovation space. And one can argue that you could actually use some of these instruments to actually source innovation. Perhaps if you think innovatively, you can actually do a combination of these and come out with an instrument or sort of an approach to purchase innovation, but it makes it difficult. Yet globally, there are instruments that are available to actually procure instruments that have been developed specifically for the purposes of innovation. And it brings me to the next slide, which is basically the new dawn. I borrowed from the president's, what you call it, words, which you call it the new dawn, which is basically what is happening in the innovation procurement space. And I just want us to focus our attention specifically on the three new instruments that have come up, and the other countries such as the OECD, the EU, the USA, Germany, and China are actually using these instruments and are finding them to be actually quite instrumental in driving innovation. So, like I've said, internationally, it has been observed that procurement legislation stifles innovation in general. And this is why some of these countries have come together and developed innovation procurement instruments that enable innovation through the procurement processes from a demand side. These countries, like I mentioned, is the OECD countries, China, India, Germany, USA. So they're already thinking ahead. And if you remember the last slide that I showed, is that, and I asked you a question that you need to think about, where do we sit in terms of the curves that we are seeing from an innovation point of view? And I'll ask you the question, where are we in this curve of innovation procurement? I think we have not actually started thinking about it. I know there's only been 2 articles from an academic perspective that have been written on innovation procurement, one by Professor Achio Kunon, and then the other one by Professor Phoebe Bolton, both from the University of Stellenbosch. But other than that, there has been much literature to start off with. And I don't think there's been a lot of other resources that are available. But I think it's an important start for us to actually have this conversation, to open our minds to such instruments and see how we can actually, as a platform that we are in, motivate that our Treasury starts looking into these, the Department of Science and Innovation starts looking into these instruments. And I've been very fortunate to have commented on the 10-year plan for innovation from the DSI. And, I think it's encouraging to see that they're looking towards that direction, and it's quite exciting. But we need to make sure that the procurement regulations are also speaking to this. Okay. I've already mentioned all of that, so I'll just jump to the next slide. So basically, we are facing some challenges in the national landscape, in that, there's an assumption that innovation can actually be procured with the existing instruments. It may be, but can it be efficiently procured within the resources? Because Section 195 of the Constitution says we need to actually use the resources efficiently. The public resources needs to be used efficiently, and we need to look at efficient ways of actually procuring innovation, and the existing instruments just don't speak to that. So there are no innovation procurement instruments in South Africa as we speak. So it's something that needs a significant attention. And the available ones, which includes things like deviations that enable innovation procurement, they attract a lot of audit queries. Perhaps it's because there's a lack of understanding of these instruments, or there's a lack of skill, or there's a lack of trust due to the levels of corruption that we experience in the country. And yeah, I've mentioned that there's very limited literature. So what now? So we need to consider instruments that are, that speak to Section 217 of the Constitution, which is fairness, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective, and not forgetting Section 195 about efficiency. And so we need to look at those instruments, and some of the available instruments in the world is that, these instruments in the world are leading to quite a lot of change, and the world is innovating, and change is coming, and we need to embrace it, and we need to make sure that we look forward to that, and we need to be equipped, most importantly, for these changes that are coming. So I've mentioned all of this, so I'll just move on to the next one. So these are the innovation procurement instruments that are available. These are the new ones specifically. We have pre-commercialization procurement, otherwise known as PCP. And then we have public procurement of innovation, PPI. And we have innovation partnerships, IP. So these are the instruments I'll be focusing on in my presentation, and I'll just be delving into a bit of detail. Perhaps maybe when I'm done with the presentation, we'll get an opportunity to actually discuss these. So if we look at pre-commercialization procurement, it's actually an open, transparent, and competitive approach for procuring research and development. And, it's very difficult to procure research and development because at the moment, in most cases, you don't get a tangible product or tangible service. And the IP in some instances is owned by the service provider. So how do you go about doing that? And you find that there's funding instruments that are put in place to fund certain organizations or certain people that want to do research and development. But there's a gap because, how do you do it in a manner that is competitive, open, and transparent? And yet you want to hold on to some aspects of the IP as well to drive your own objective as a country. So this is where you find that there's certain limitations on the funding instrument side of things. So basically, this instrument is there to actually procure solutions where they don't typically exist at all, or there is no close to market service or product, and it can be deployed without actually committing to actually going on a large scale production of such. So you can basically, what this entails or what this says is that you can actually procure research and development through, I'll talk about it in the next slide, that you can actually have a number of suppliers participating in that, and you award them to a group of suppliers. It can be split, the award can be split amongst those suppliers, but yet you do not have the commitment to actually take that outcome or that prototype that has been tested to the market. So you don't have that commitment. So this type of instrument allows you to actually cap it before the market stage. So it's important because it actually steers development of new solutions in the country. So if you're talking about promoting innovation, this is a type of instruments where you're saying that we have a particular problem, I don't know, with potholes in the country. How do we find a solution that actually works so that we don't have to always keep going back to the same potholes in the country? So you're creating an environment where you are allowing service providers or contractors to go out there, think about ideas and provide propose solutions, and then you can opt to go with those and take it to market and industrialize them, or you can decide that you're just going to keep it at the PCP stage. And I'll talk about PPI and how it differs from PCP. So like I said, you can have several suppliers. There's shared risks and shared benefits as part of this. And also there's the sharing of the intellectual property, as I had mentioned. And the unique thing about this PCP is that, in the bid process, the supplier can sort of tender a price that contains the financial compensation for either keeping the IP or the IP being owned by, say, the public entity that is actually going out of this. So there's different pricing matrices that can be used to be adjusted depending on whether the IP, who owns the IP, and that becomes a major factor in terms of how the pricing comes in. But what is critical here is that even though say the supplier has the IP and owns it, the procurer has the rights to use that R&D result that comes out of that process and can actually use it to develop a different type of innovation from that specific innovation. So you can see now the scope of that innovation is actually growing, and without actually using the same innovation that came out of that process, a new strain of innovation can actually come out. And the procurer, which is the public entity, can have that opportunity to take that result that came before the near market and drive it towards a direction where it actually starts a new procurement process via the PPI, which I'll explain in a bit shortly. And so this is what some of the other countries like the EU have done. So they've exempted PCP from the Public Procurement Directive. So like you'd have in the military, my understanding is that, or the defense, is that there's certain exemptions that the military has from a procurement perspective, especially when there's either very strategic equipment that needs to be procured or very specialized equipment that needs to be procured. So we need to also perhaps think about such options of exempting perhaps innovation in certain aspects of innovation from the legislation itself. And for example, PCP is also exempted from the World Trade Organization Government Procurement Agreement because the agreement does not cover R&D services, so it falls outside of that scope. And I've mentioned earlier from the state aid rules, it doesn't fall within the scope because the state aid is not done in an open, transparent, and competitive procedure or approach, and that there's no risk sharing and benefits sharing at the marketplace on that. Just in terms of the PCP steps and how the model is actually built, you find that it actually follows the exact same process as you would in a tendering process. So it doesn't make it specifically different or particularly different from the normal tendering process as you would have an RFP, for example. And in fact, you could use an RFP as a tool to drive this instrument as a PCP. But what makes it unique or different is that you have different phases that are incorporated in that. So you have the solution exploration phase and the prototyping phase, and also the original development of the test series in that, to make the innovation available. And I'll talk later on as to how this is actually packaged. And usually they use framework agreements to actually package these type of instruments. So this is just to highlight as well the point that I've made around the framework agreements which are used. So if you go back to the different steps that I had in the previous slides, there's different phases, and you just look at it in the context of this. So phase one, so you would go out on a framework agreement type of procedure to the market, and you attract as many participants as you would have, as many as 5 or more, for the first phase. But what happens is that when you are going out on this tender, it's an all-encompassing tender process where you including the different expectations at different levels. And each of these bidders, when they are responding to that frame, to that PCP, is that they need to actually respond to the phase one in detail, and they need to also give an indication of the plans and the goals in achieving phase 2 and phase 3. So you evaluate it holistically. And what is important is that the rules or the conditions are set for all the 3 phases at that one tender stage, which when you are tendering as part of that very same framework agreement, which encompasses all of the phases. So you won't have a situation where at each phase you need to go out on tender, at each phase you need to go out on tender, but you have one encompassing a tender, but structured in phases, and a framework agreement is a very useful tool to actually drive that approach. And you'll find that at each of the various phases, you start getting fewer and fewer suppliers as you are eliminating them as part of the procurement process. So this is also a sort of multiple stage process within this, where it happens over a period of time, and you note that there would be compensation because there's work done and there's output from these service providers as it comes from. So it does not focus on cost. I know our legislative prescripts at the moment, there's a lot of focus on cost and irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure, and all of those things. And this is why it is important to engage and have those debates and how you would actually look at innovation in a manner that specifies it. And there's no running away from the fact that with innovation, you need to open up the net and get as more ideas as possible, but there's a lot of sensitive IP-related information that comes with that. And one key thing about it is that you can have a different, unique approach where you have, say, one entity that has an idea and they want to go on a PCP for this idea, but then they realize that perhaps it might be too expensive for them to go about this alone. Then they look at other entities that may have similar interest. So there will be a promotion stage where they promote to other entities to say who else would be interested in participating in this PCP. They would then combine and be those public bodies would then come together. There would be a lead body that actually runs with the procurement, and it then would be the lead tendering body, which the participating contractors would be responding to or sort of managing. They'll be like the project manager, if I can put it in those simpler terms, running the whole project for all of those public bodies. So there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration on this, and ensuring that there's a reduction in costs and all of that. And each of these persons or these stakeholders have a stake in the outcome or the output, and you'll find what they do beyond that PCP stage would then depend upon them and what was agreed upfront at the promotion stage. Okay, so then looking at the PPI, so it's a significantly this is basically the implementation of new or significantly improved product. What I mean by that is that it's a product that is new. It's been researched and developed or sort of near market, you have a prototype, but you want to upscale it, but there's no previous buyers, there's no history or market history of this product being bought. And we often say at the NRF, we want references that you've done it for someone else, because we want companies that are reputable, which is fair. But with this particular case, how do you then go about procuring something that is new? There's no record of anyone purchasing it, but it's a technology or it's a product, it's a service, it's there, but there's no record of it being produced before. So, like I said, it can be any process or building or construction or anything of the sort. So now this is where then the PPI methodology or sort of instrument becomes critical. So with the PPI, with the PPI instrument, the public sector then plays the role of the launching customer, the launch pad, if I can call it that, for that particular service or product. And you will find that it is mostly in cases where there has been a PCP process that has been followed, and there's that idea that has come out of that process. And now one of the, say, participants in that group of public sector bodies want to go forward, and they'll go out on a PPI to say, look, there is this technology, and this is basically the functional requirements that it comes out with. Can anyone that is out there in the market actually produce this? So it actually triggers industry for scale. And you'll find that in some cases, one of those member bodies acts as the launching pad, and then there's the others that were part of that in their group actually observe how this actually pans out, and they'll find that it actually works, and then they'll start rolling on. It's all about the risk appetite, really, as well. So PPIs are basically usually done in conjunction with competitive procedures with negotiation. I think I've in one of the first slides, I actually highlighted some of the instruments. So competitive procedure with negotiation is one of them, and it can also be used in conjunction with either competitive dialogue. I won't go into details about these instruments, but these are instruments that enable the type of procurement instrument method that the PPI is. And just looking at the ecosystem in terms of who gets involved in the PPI system, you'll notice that there's a number of stakeholders sitting around the table. You have the innovation department, the ministry. This is the case of the European Union. You have the procurement department, the ICT department. I'm assuming here it's in relation to a new technology. So you have the innovative companies, which is basically, this is a type of situation where the competitive dialogue or negotiated type of procurement where the suppliers or the innovation companies, they actually sit at the table as well as part of developing that technology. And you have project managers and all the other stakeholders that are felt to be necessary. And most importantly as well, you'd have those legal experts who would look at the legalese around the whole process. Okay, so basically in terms of the activities in the preparation phase of this, it's also the same basically as the normal procurement as well. You identify the need, determining the potential available state-of-the-art solution there. And what is key is that you need to plan ahead, because you need to allow the respondents or the suppliers to actually come up with that solution or think around the solution. So there's the early announcement is a very important and key thing to allow them time. Sometimes it can take 3 to 6 months where you're in the market, where they're actually developing this, and you'll be able to get feedback. So when developing this type of procurement instrument, you need to actually make sure either you're using a functional or performance-based specification, and critical is to not over-specify, so as to not limit the innovation of these suppliers, because you need to ensure that you give them room to innovate and provide alternatives, basically. And what is also important is briefing session, where the participants or the suppliers can also be part of the engagements. So it becomes very critical there. And the legalese as well, as I've mentioned. And what's important as well for this is just improving on the procurement capabilities, as well as trying to make sure that there's workshops and there's training and network activities. And I think such kind of platforms like this one enables and allows for sharing of ideas and thoughts and skills. So activities in the procurement phases call for tenders, the evaluation, the normal stuff, and then the purchasing, or whoever's launching that, and then the procurement process, ensuring that it complies with the laws, which is basically all the people that are around the table, and evaluating the benefits of the procurement. I think that one is very important, because you need to actually at some point determine whether the procurement was actually successful. And with innovation, there's always room for making mistakes and doing the wrong thing, or not doing the wrong thing, but not succeeding in that innovation, because I think it's in the nature of defining innovation as well. There's no guarantees that it will work. So it is important then to also evaluate the benefits of that particular procurement. And just to highlight here the differences, because I spoke about PCP and I spoke about PPI. I'll try and rush through the next coming slides to give us time to engage. So just to look at the differences between the two. So if you're looking at developing or coming up with a new idea, which is phase 1 to say phase 3, there's a curiosity stage, and up until you have a prototype. And you're looking at the different suppliers, you can narrow it down up until phase 3, as I alluded, and it goes up until that point with the PCP. Then for PPI, it takes it from the point of that idea having been tested or having had an experiment that is successful, and you move it forward, which is the phase 4, which is the commercialization of that particular innovation. So this just highlights what the difference is between the two instruments that I've spoken about. And then innovation partnership is basically a new special procedure for establishment of long-term partnerships. And it can be delivered at agreed performance levels and costs. So what this tool is, actually, one would say it's a combination of the two previous instruments, but not necessarily, because it has its own unique elements, which I'll speak about. So this one enables you to have an innovative solution developed and tailored to the specific needs of the organization that is procuring. And also it is a process that is combined with an R&D contract. So for example, if you want to procure a new innovation that is new to the market, and you go about it and it's been developed, and you find that you want to develop this product further, instead of going out to the market again to try and develop that particular product, an innovation partnership is a all-inclusive, where you started the R&D, you develop it, and then from that point on, you actually sort of large-scale manufacture that product, and then you have a contract with performance and service levels of researching that and developing that particular innovation further, without you having to go out in the market, and actually protects the IP and the intellectual property for the bidder that was originally awarded, so that you don't have conflicts when it comes to that. And it actually allows you to actually develop that innovation further. So it requires long-term partnership between the procurer or the buyer and the supplier. Okay, so I think I've spoken about that. So just looking at the innovation partnership in relation to pre-commercial partnership. If you have basically a technology readiness level scale from 0 to 9, and on the left-hand side, you have pre-commercial partnership, which goes from 0 to 6. So having from the idea stage up to the technology demonstration and in the relevant environment, you would then have the innovation partnership starting at the, say, technology concept or formulation stage up to the where you have a proven system that has been further refined over time. This is just to show how it actually relates to PCP. Okay. So I think this slide is quite important, colleagues, because it actually gives you some kind of a mind map or a guide in terms of how to actually use these type of instruments. And I think this one focuses mainly on innovation partnership, but you'll see when I go through it quickly that there's an element of the PCP as well as the PPI. So some of the questions that you ask yourself: is the contract authority well familiar with the market? If no, then you can get a market consultant to actually guide you. If yes, then you ask the next question: is an innovation solution needed here? If no, then obviously then you go on an open or restricted procedure as you normally would. But if an innovation solution is needed, then you start thinking differently. And you ask yourself the question: is it possible to adapt an existing market solution as an innovation? If yes, then it follows this route that leads you to either a competitive dialogue, a competitive procedure with negotiation. But what's important is that on this arm as well, it gives room for the PPI to actually follow through, because there's cases where you would want there's an existing solution but needs to be actually developed differently to meet a specific need that makes it innovation in some respect. So it then follow this route in that regard. And then if the answer to that question is that it's not possible to adapt something that already exists, you ask yourself a question: is there subsequent acquisition of the innovation expected, provided that it corresponds to the agreed performance levels and maximum costs that need to be looked at. So now you want to start a process where you're developing something completely new, but you have performance levels that you need to be putting in place, and that there's subsequent research and development that needs to come through with that. Then you follow the route of an innovation partnership. But where none of those is needed, and where there is no need to actually, if you're not sure whether once you have the final prototype that is tested, you're not sure whether you want to actually do a large scale production, then you'd follow a new route, which is basically that route of the pre-commercialization procurement. And I think so these are some of the risks that one would just want to consider from a procurement risk perspective. I won't go into them. I don't think we have enough time, but I will share the slides with Sean to share with the colleagues. But these are some of the risks at different levels that one would actually want to look at, in particular the procurement risk stage, and then the innovation risks, and what is in between, which is basically the institutional and societal stuff, and from a technology perspective. And this ties down to the regulations that are available. Do they permit, from adaptation and all of that? What do you do with challenges from a legal perspective and all of that? So those are some of the considerations that one would actually need to take into account. Okay, so at the moment, what are the constraints that we are facing regarding these instruments? Is that while the white paper and the procurement 10-year plan, the innovation 10-year plan supports the move towards the procurement-centric innovation deployment approach, we need to have some relevant laws to guide this to a certain degree, or some exemptions. There needs to be capacity that needs to be built so that these are well understood and are not used for the wrong reasons, where now you find yourself in trouble with the Auditor General. And then there's also proper classification and enumeration of available instruments that needs to take place, I think, in my view at least, because I haven't seen anywhere where there's proper classification of all the instruments that are available, never mind the ones for innovation. And then also some guidelines are necessary for application of this. And yeah, thank you, colleagues.
Well, all I can say is, well, Lwazi, well done. Thank you for that. This is progressing at a rapid rate, and your thinking and your understanding of this space is just maturing every time you present. So well done to you, and well done to your colleagues for supporting you with this. Are there any questions? To kick off with, you can either just unmute or you could put your hand up. Maybe just to kind of get some discussion going, Lwazi. On the one hand, if you go to slide 7 that you put up, if you just type 7 and press enter, it'll go all the way to 7. I think that's where you've put the different instruments down.
I don't know, it's frozen. Okay, let me try
click now and then 7 and enter. Yeah. Okay, cool.
So slide 7.
That's it. So if you look at those different instruments that are described there,
yes,
competitive negotiations, competitive dialogue, design competitions, framework agreements, none of those are actually described currently in any legislation or any your framework agreements. There's descriptions on framework agreements in CIDB. So we've basically got unsolicited bids, RFQs, and deviations.
Correct. That's my understanding. Yes.
One of the opportunities we may have is to say, let's not legislate these methods. Let's rather just continue with the methods in an unlegislated space, rather than waiting for National Treasury to legislate the methods. I mean, design competitions there at 2-3 o'clock, 2:30. Is not described anywhere in any instruction, but is being used. So, is there rather a way that we try and create the environment where there is a better understanding by the AG and the different treasuries of these techniques that you've just described now, and make them more acceptable than trying to now find some way to legislate the methods, and rather, instead of pushing for the legislation of methods, we push for the unlegislation of methods, but we rather grow the understanding of some basic principles amongst the AG and the different treasuries to help manage these things. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. And
yeah, no, Sean, I think you've actually hit the nail on the head. My personal view of it is that, the more you put legislation around these things, the more you limit yourself. But when you put principles in place, you actually allow for innovation to actually grow based on those particular principles. The minute you confine it by giving it rules, okay, you need to do this and this and make sure you do this, then you're going to find yourself wanting in certain cases, because you won't find a situation where you have an actual legislation that actually encompasses all types of innovation. There will be a unique set or unique type of innovation that sort of falls either on the very edge of the boundary of the legislation, or just slightly on the outside. And what do you do with that type of situation? Because we're dealing with a type of say product, service, or good that changes with time, and it develops, it continuously evolves. So then how do you limit it? By putting legislation, you are actually confining it, and you're not allowing to grow. So if you look at it, for example, in a context of, I don't know, if you're baking something and you're in a tight container, it doesn't grow, but it still wants to grow, it still has room to grow, and it will protrude somewhere out because it cannot be confined, and that's the true definition of it. So by having principles, at best, you're actually allowing it to actually be flexible. Like, for example, those principles that are in section 217, as a minimum, and just say, okay, it needs to tick those boxes, and that's it. That's my view of it. I don't know if the other colleagues have other thoughts around that, and whether they feel that maybe legislating is actually the best way to go about it, and maybe they could just share their argument around why they think legislation is perhaps the best way to go about it, or are they of the view that maybe principles are the best way to go as well?
Because if we look at the EU, over the last few decades, they've had competitive dialogues and competitive negotiations, and those have been fundamental building blocks in the innovation space. And those building blocks have been fundamental now in PCP and PPI.
Very much so.
And if we're going to start legislating this thing, then we're going to probably never leapfrog to PPP and PCP and PPI. We're going to first try and get everybody to understand the principles around competitive dialogues and competitive negotiations. And when that's done and all the treasuries all understand that, then we'll start as a country talking about PCP and PPI. And we back at Jurassic Park, and we haven't left.
Exactly.
Any other thoughts from anyone? This is not meant to be a discussion between Sean and Lwazi. And have you had a chance yet to reach out to any of the other institutions that are procuring innovation? And I'm thinking CSIR, the IDC in some way. There's an organization called the Mine Health and Safety Council. These are organizations that are at the moment procuring. Have you had a chance yet to reach out to those? Hey, Sanele.
Okay, Sanele.
Go ahead, and then we'll ask Sanele to come in.
Yeah, no, Ron. I was sorry, Sean. I wanted to say that we haven't, and I think this is a conversation I've had with Ron, who's the head of supply chain in the NRF, is that perhaps the next steps, amongst the next steps would be to actually start engaging and opening it up, just getting their thoughts as well as to what they think about it. But we needed to also frame our own thoughts
start getting your
before we
thoughts
can
together.
actually, exactly, yeah.
I mean, you've got the innovation hub over the road from NRF.
Correct. Yes.
There's the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency with a huge number of innovation entities within it.
Correct. And then that's why I was excited at one point. I think we had, what is the name again on the previous session? The lady from the Innovation Hub.
From Innovation Hub, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So she was amongst the people that I actually wanted to reach out to, just to start the engagement.
Do you want to come in, Sanele?
Yes, thanks, Sean. in fact, you beat me to it in the question of the stakeholder departments, but I wanted to go to the stakeholder slide. I don't remember what slide is it, but on the round table there.
Yeah, that's a fantastic slide.
Yeah, because for me, when I look at that slide, that's what I'm mindful that the researcher said it is based on one of the European countries, but I did try to link it to our current setup in South Africa, because if you look at the innovation department, I was actually thinking of this group Department of
Science and Innovation.
And yes, which I think is a subsidiary there. And I also thought of the Department of Higher Education and Training, which also may assist in streamlining or identifying the relevant, the relevant courses and the universities that may assist in putting together a curriculum that will produce skills or the student which may be compatible to this research needs. Because currently, the situation that we have in the public sector is that we don't have, let me not say we don't have, let me say, I'm not confident with the level of SCM practitioners to achieve this. To achieve this, simply because I think that one of the things that I'm lucky of is to review the policies of the department. So you know, if you review the policies of the department, it's like you are marking a paper for someone. So you get to understand their level of capacity. And then if you go to this research presentation, you can see that it is very it's high level of internet process. Now, I would think that the Ministry of Economic and Competitiveness would be the Department of Trade and Industry, which also can play a role in this.
All of these.
Because there is a lot of subsidiary entities there which talks to competition, and it may also play a good role in trying to ensure that we build or create laws that will try to put competitiveness in this whole process, you see. And if you put in a national treasurer, there is an office of the chief procurement officer which can play a role there, because they oversee the whole procurement. So you do not need individual departments procurement to play a role. You can play a role there in this regard, and you can put CETA in the ICT department. And then there could be some other stakeholders that you can identify. But I think for me, it is quite interesting, and you do need to, maybe if you can shed a light, if you have probably considered liaising with those departments, or still on the path of the direction.
Thanks, Sonele. Just as you were talking, I was thinking about an oxygen concentrator, which has been prototyped in the country and has been offered to all the departments of health in the country. It's because it's a critical thing that's needed now for the pandemic. And the inventor said none of the departments of health know what to do with it.
Sure.
Because and I think that's one of the points that is making here is maybe we don't have a mature enough public procurement profession that could work without regulations. And that's a big question that we as public procurement professionals need to be asking, or as the profession needs to ask, is do we only really work when there is a regulation that describes how we do things? Any thoughts
very important.
on Sanele's points?
I think Sanele raised very key and important points. I think in particular on the capacity building aspect. And I think towards the end of my slides, I actually maybe not really emphasized, but acknowledge that capacity building plays a very critical role in this whole innovation space. And it's a bit concerning, Sean, because like I said, there's lack of diffusions at many levels, and not just at the legislative aspect, but our level of aptitude and passion for innovation actually doesn't speak to the direction we want to go from an innovation policy perspective. Exactly. So there's a big gap there that needs to be addressed. The big question is who needs to address it and who needs to be at the forefront of tying all of these things together, because everyone is coming with their own approach, but it sort of relates to something else, but does not actually engage that other person to tie it together. So I think looking at it in my research at a high level, there's a lack of connectivity across the various departments within the government itself, to start off with, because what other countries are getting right is that this round table is actually used efficiently, and this is where the direction is actually being coined. And without us taking that seriously as a starting point, I don't think we will get to a point where we move forward, because even though we acknowledge the fact that there's a lack of skills, but yes, there's a lack of skills, but what are we doing about it? And where is the skills conversation channeling towards? I think you had shown that is it a competency framework session?
Yeah.
Yes, that becomes very critical. And I think this is where we are at this conversation at the moment, where we're talking about innovation, because I think Ron actually asked the question as to how many times does innovation appear in that, and what is the direction taken there. And you'll sense from there, it's at surface level, it's not digging deep into the key issues. And that's where the concern is, from at least my perspective. And I think Sanele has actually captured it very, eloquently. So yeah, I think that's my view on that.
Thank you. Let's go to Thokozani.
Hi there.
Hi, Thokozani.
Hi,
Go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay, lovely presentation, Lwazi.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure which slide it was, but out of curiosity, you said we're on the 6th wave. So are there any countries in SA that are actually practicing those AIs in terms of their procurement? Because I see that you are introducing these 3 innovation solutions, but I'm just curious if we are up to speed with even the 6th wave in terms of AI and information of technology and robotics and drones. I mean, some companies might be doing it, but I mean, in terms of SA, how far are we?
I don't have an answer to that, Thokozani. I think just as a knee jerk from my side is that I know that organizations such as the CSIR are actually driving hard on that. And I believe that the University of Pretoria as well does have a division that focuses on, elements of this. And there's been the whole Internet of Things Commission that was put in place, that is actually vice chaired by the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, Professor Marwalwa. In terms of where we are with progress and, are we getting traction and such kind of things, I'll be honest to say that I don't know. And this is where part of my concern comes, because it appears that we might be just paying lip service to all of these things and, taking a very high surface level approach into it. And the problem comes with the availability of the necessary skills as well to actually deploy that. But, just because we are not at, say, level 5, the peak of level 5, for example, or peak of level 4, doesn't mean we can't start building on, the next wave as well. Because if we are trying to play catch up on the various areas, without actually extending ourselves to other new areas, it means that we may never catch up at all. So somehow we just need to try and balance the scales in driving a forward approach, small steps, but maybe at some point we will be at a stage where we have found ourselves leapfrogging to the future. And if you look at countries like China, they were far behind, and they took a very decisive approach to say, look, we're just going to do everything. We're taking it all. And they just pumped volumes. Yes, quality was a problem, but they leapfrogged until such a point where they were able to bring the necessary resources in country to upskill their own people, because they've established that they can do it, but the quality levels were not at a desired state. But to change that, they needed to make sure now that, okay, the next level is to bring in the quality level. And this is where a quality model of China was actually developed. And they've actually been moved forward. They've leapfrogged by many years, jumping other countries that have actually been trying to ride the wave step by step. That's just the view I have.
So, Lwazi, give some thought to what some of the next steps might be that this group around the virtual table might help you with. And whilst you're giving some thought to that, let's hear Sanele's comment. Sanele? You can unmute.
Thanks again, colleagues. Again, this presentation, I just want to congratulate my colleagues. This is a very interesting and informative session today. I always worry in South Africa we end up importing everything. Lately, we're bringing in Cuban doctors, we're bringing in Cuban teachers, we're bringing in Cuban engineers. One of the things, commenting in element terms, is that innovation is normally produced by specialists, but it also produces additional specialists. Now, if we would drive this, we would have enough specialists in the country. And as much as the budget, it might be costly, but I would say we will have enough to move the country forward. But I want us to look in the point that my colleague Sean was making of the question of regulations. That at least if we can move in a space where we do not regulate this process, so that we can try to limit the red tapes. Let's go to the realities now. What we face here in South Africa. If we were to continue with that approach, which is actually the great approach, because the innovation is a very complex space, and if you regulate that space, it means you will have less production. But if we do not regulate it again, in this kind of South Africa, where there is quite a lot of money involved, like my colleague was saying, we need to consider less in terms of spending, because there's a lot of money to be spent in this process. Are we going to be safe from those who always see an opportunity of ulterior motive if this space is less regulated? have the colleagues considered that my research, Lwazi, if you look into those aspects, if we push with this concept and we create a space that is less regulated, so that we can at least limit the red tapes and try to put more money in this whole concept. If we looked into how we're going to overcome the question of ethics in terms of the usage of funds, the question of budget and financial viability in the long run. Just to look into, to zoom into that, colleagues. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sanil. I think you've actually touched on some key important points. And I think maybe if I can just start on the one regarding the unregulated aspects of this. So what were to perhaps happen? Have you researched, have you thought about it? And I think the answer is yes. There have been some thoughts around, how would we envision this playing out, and especially in an unregulated manner. And I think what is key is that you do not necessarily, when you're regulating, I believe you're putting in place rules and steps to follow, and making sure that you need to tick certain boxes. If it's not black, or if it's not in this box, then there's something wrong, or if it's in this box, there's something wrong, depending on how you look at it. But I think the perspective that I have, or the viewpoint that I have in an unregulated setup for innovation procurement is that you do not necessarily have to put rules in place, but you need to have a stringent qualifying process. So what do I mean by that? So in order for something to qualify as a particular innovation, or to qualify as part of innovation, it needs to have gone through quite a rigorous determination that I know it delays the process of innovating itself, but once it has been qualified, it gets to that point, then you're actually moving, and there's no limitation, there's no restrictions around that, but you monitor progress with time, and there's obviously reporting that needs to come out of this. And the key thing about these instruments is that they encourage a lot of transparency. So, the most important thing is that when it comes to transparency, the whole process is at the view of anyone and everyone, obviously without the IP-related elements to it. So at each stage, there's transparency of who's involved, who is participating, what is their bid, what offer do they put to the table, and all of that. So that level of transparency will also eliminate, to a certain degree, corrupt elements, if I can put it that way, because it opens up room for certain questions where something does not seem to be right. And I will put a position to say that perhaps there needs to be more thought that would go into how would you then manage this without the necessary legislations. But there's been some thoughts, well, at least from my side with my research that I'm doing, to say, look, there is possible opportunities of going about it without regulating it in the way that we regulate at the moment. But what's important is the qualification stage for something to qualify as an innovation, and also the transparency that comes with the process. I don't know if that answers the question that you had there.
Very good.
No, thanks. I think it fits the right.
Lwazi, next steps. I mean, have you had any thoughts about where this could go? Is this going to be something that how do we move beyond the fourth industrial revolution T-shirts and start to get this going, what could some of the next steps be? I mean, I've made some notes here. I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Sean, with the notes that you have, but I think I've also just perhaps jotted down some of the thoughts around what would be the next steps, because I think what's important here is awareness, firstly, Sean.
Which is what you started, absolutely.
Yes, yes. So there needs to be awareness that there is this particular area, and I know that the DSI is working towards the very same objective or the same goal of, putting procurement as one of the focal points to drive innovation. And I think where the noise is not being held ahead is rather on those that are dealing with procurement.
In the procurement space.
Correct. And with the relevant treasuries now needs to start getting into the conversation. I think this is where, for me, I believe it becomes critical, where those think tanks, for example, I don't know, your platform actually provides a very good opportunity, Sean, for such engagements. And if perhaps it strikes some interest, perhaps some of the colleagues can say, okay, look, in our environment, we deal with this type of innovation, either through you or sent directly to myself, but how do we engage? And then you start getting all those engagement and creating the opportunity to communicate and start asking the relevant questions around this. So those are just at the moment some of the thoughts, Sean, but I had not actually thought about the direction. But if you have ideas, I welcome.
Have a discussion with your team and the people that you're working with. But would you be open to maybe starting a procurement of innovation specialist interest group, and trying to at least get the entities and the people first who are interested in the space together, and so that's one. And I don't know if you would be prepared to just act as that contact person initially, that people could write to and say, hey, I'm keen to be part of this procurement of innovation special interest group. So that's one. Yeah. The other one might be if there's anyone who ever thinks that they've got some opportunity here to maybe trial one of these methods, to maybe put their hand up and say, hey, Lwazi, I think we've got something here. Could you maybe suggest something? And maybe if there's anyone out there that you can get some case studies on to start that, I mean, that would be nice. And then I think also probably just to continue with this awareness building process, to maybe put some white papers out there and get those distributed, put them down, write them, get them done, and let's get those out and get them to. I mean, you've got 2 provincial treasuries online today. So you've already got some of the and that 2 of the biggest provinces. So anyway, there's some thoughts. I don't know if there's any other thoughts that anyone else has on what can be done to continue this process and this drive. Well, I think that was an excellent. Hey, Sanele.
Sanele.
Yes, thanks, colleagues. I'll be short. My worry is, you see, as current things stand, we are working in quite a very bureaucratic situation, where we can't just initiate some of the things. You see, you'll be surprised. You see, currently my space is no longer dealing with the operational procurements where we buy. It's more official related. But I would wish to be part of this journey with Mr. Qangule. Anywhere where you can and safe space for us to.
Fantastic, man.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And you're at KZN Treasury, you know?
Yes.
Fantastic. There we are. And
Yeah, so yeah, but there's something you can convey in terms of the information. I would appreciate to learn some more.
fantastic.
Okay.
And you've got some good pathfinders down there as well in Etiquini that can also possibly get on board. So fantastic.
Awesome. No, I'll reach out to you, Sanele, and perhaps we can just have initial thoughts and engagements about this and where it could possibly go. But yeah, Sean, I think I liked your suggestions, and I'll also reach out to you in terms of how we can actually develop those more or further.
You know, and I mean, if there's anything we can do to help, if you want to use one of these sessions to maybe launch the special interest group, then let us know. If there's something we could do in any of the other conferences that are coming up. There are a couple that are coming up this year. Would you be open to doing more of these presentations at some of those seminars?
Definitely, yes.
Great, we can get you on those agendas for sure. Well, fantastic. Thank you very much, Lwazi. And any final comments from anyone? And then we'll ask Lwazi to wrap up, and then I'll just briefly talk about next week.
Sean, hello, it's Ron. Sean, sorry, I missed the beginning of the presentation, so I'm not sure if this point's been covered. For us, this type of innovation and leapfrogging is the most remarkable opportunity for transformation. So, one has the opportunity at the very very earliest stages to draw in BBBE partners. And the opportunity for wealth creation is immense. And I'm not sure if the other colleagues have any thoughts about that. But for me, this is probably our most powerful transformation tool.
Yeah, Ron, it was not actually captured in the presentation. I think I left it out as part of the other stuff I took out. But thank you very much for bringing it, because it's a very important aspect of what innovation procurement can do in terms of the transformation goals that we have as a country. So yeah, no, thank you for actually bringing it up, Ron. Sorry.
I will forward to you, Lwazi, it's about a 200-page research document that was done in the US, where they did a study on the procurement of innovation and its support of the development of small businesses, and how it's been very important in this. So I managed to get that report. We'll get it to you.
Fantastic. That would be appreciated, Sean.
Please copy me, Sean.
Will do, Ron. Very good. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lwazi. Thank you, everybody. That was fascinating and a very, very professionally put together presentation. Loved your little graphics. Loved the extent to which you have gone beyond the three-letter acronym, the PCP, to really describing what it is in detail. So well done to you, Lwazi, and let's keep this going. Fantastic, man.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you.
And let us know if and how we can help. All right. And very good. We've had a couple of questions in the last week, just to please have more of a discussion around that draft instruction that came out around sessions and assignment. Now the feedback to Treasury closes next week on Thursday, so we will have a little discussion, a little bit more on that next week, to just talk a little bit more around those things. Then we've also got lined up quite in the next couple of weeks. We're going to have a presentation from some of the guys in Etiquini, who are doing some really, really nice things around developing small businesses. And there's an agreement in principle from them to also contribute, and we'll get something going from them on that one. And yeah, I think that's it. And then we've also got potentially we've got somebody who's going to be coming in from the EU to just give us some input on the EU's approach. I forget the document now. It's the one document that they use to try and avoid having bidders submit all their paperwork with the bids. And we should be able to get somebody on to come through and just share with us a little bit about how that's gone, what they're doing in that space, because it seems to be a very cost-effective way of avoiding all these issues that we've got in the evaluation process of going through and checking all certificates and certified and all that kind of stuff. So we should get something from them as well on that one. So just a couple of things that are lined up in the next week. But next week we'll focus primarily on just pulling together a couple of firm recommendations then to Treasury on the assignment and session draft instruction that they put out. Well done, Lwazi.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. All right, we'll close this off and please take